Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in a couple of moments, but first I'd like to check to make sure the audio is working properly. If you guys could just send a message really quick, those of you who are on the webinar, just to let me know that you guys can hear me, that would be wonderful. Okay, it looks like the audio is working great. We're going to go ahead and get started, and hopefully some other people will join us as the webinar goes along. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar in our JET Alumni webinar series. My name is Casey Neely. I'm the program coordinator for USJETAA, and I will be moderating this webinar, which is Legal Equals Careers in Law. I'd like to welcome all of our speakers today, which are Andy McCarthy, Stephen Horowitz, Sarah Lee, and Jonathan Carl. They'll be sharing their knowledge with us, so I'd like to give them a really big thank you. Taking a look at the agenda for today's webinar, each of our speakers will be providing information on how JET alumni can pursue careers in the legal field. They will talk about their journey after JET, how they got to their current position, what they're doing now, and then give you some advice for some of you who are considering pursuing a career in law. After that, we'll have a Q&A session for the audience to ask questions. Before I hand it over to our speakers, I'd like to briefly introduce USJETAA, which is the United States-Japan Exchange and Teaching Program Alumni Association. It's a nonprofit organization that furthers the U.S.-Japan relationship by supporting alumni of the JET program. We provide resources for JET alumni, JETAA chapters, as well as potential JET participants. So if you're not a member of USJETAA, you should definitely consider becoming a member. It's absolutely free, and you can join at our website, usjetaa.org. We do webinars like this every single month, and we also have other programming. So if you enjoy this webinar and you enjoy some of our other programming, we also ask you to consider donating to USJETAA. I'm going to talk about two of our programs before I get started. One is for current JETs and one is for JET alumni. The one for current JET is our microgrant initiative, which we do with the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo, and that funds current American JETs to do projects in their schools and in their communities. The application for this program will actually open on Thursday, August 15th. So if you know a current JET or if you are a current JET, we definitely want you to check out our website for more information. We've had some really great projects in the past, including local festivals, pen pal exchanges, and JETs who have built English libraries in their communities with the funding. We're also launching a new program for JET alumni, which is a professional resume review and career counseling service. And it's by two JET alumni who are professionals and do this for a living, and they want to pass it on to other JET alumni. The application for the services will open on August 20th, so next week. So definitely check back on our website. We don't have it up now, but we will have it up in the next week. It's open to all JET alumni and to those who will be leaving the JET program this year. There's limited free spots available, and it is a virtual service. You can do it from anywhere in the U.S., so definitely check that out. This webinar series includes webinars for individual JETs, but also for JET chapters. Before I turn it over to our first speaker for this webinar, I'd like to let everyone know that we'll be recording the webinar. So if you, for some reason, can't make it to the end of the webinar, we will be recording it so you can watch it later. If you have questions and you want to watch it later, you can do that. I'll also briefly go over how you can ask questions. So if you have questions during the webinar, you can go ahead and write them down before you forget. So there's two ways you can ask questions. You can use the Q&A feature that will be at the bottom of your screen or the top, depending on how you have it set up. You can also use the chat box to ask questions as it goes along. You can also use the raise hand function, which you can use that to ask questions with your microphone. So those are 3 different ways that you can ask questions during the webinar, and we will go ahead and answer those questions at the end of the webinar. So for right now, we're going to go ahead and start with our first speaker, who is Andy, who will be talking about private practice. I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to him, and we'll go ahead and get started. Andy? Oh, there you go. And I believe that you are muted, so if you could.
Hello, everybody.
Unmute, yeah.
All right, that's good. Let me switch these around. All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Andy McCarthy. I'm a oil and gas transactional attorney in a small firm based out of Houston, Texas. I was an ALT in the very small town of Futatsuemachi in Akita Prefecture from 2005 to 2008. Though I had some interest in law school prior to my JET experience, I had done mock trial in high school and college. I had interned for a judge during college. By the time I started JET, I was really kind of sick and tired of the law. So I'm going to cover my process from going from JET to law school to work around the beginning of my 3rd year of JET, which is when I really started pursuing law school in earnest. So the end of my 2nd year of JET, the last day, or the day I renewed my contract for the last time, I went out and I got myself an LSAT study guide, a copy of the U.S. News and World Report's law school rankings, and I registered with LSAC, which is the online law school application portal. And I studied every day from that point on till about June of 2007 when I took the LSAT. And compared to the experience I had in undergrad, I took the LSAT also in undergrad and did a pretty poor job. But having the time to do it, if you're still on JET, if you're not, maybe this doesn't matter as much. But doing it while I was still on JET in the peace and quiet of my Inaka village really actually helped my score quite a bit. But in June, I took the LSAT in Tokyo and got my score back, and it was decent enough that I could apply to some 2nd-tier law schools, not quite the top 14, but within like the top 50 or so comfortably. So I applied to some reach schools that were above my LSAT score, and then all the other schools I applied to were within my LSAT score, which was the biggest determinant of the kind of law school you would get into. When I got my results back in early 2008, I think I got accepted to all of my schools except for one reach school that had put me as an alternate. The alternate school did not provide me any scholarship money. The other reach school did provide some scholarship money. The ones within my LSAT band also did, but not as much. So what I did was I shopped around and I talked to everybody I knew on Facebook and by email who had gone to law school from undergrad and got their perspectives and asked what they think I should do with the offers that I had. And taking their thoughts into account and my own sort of internal thinking, I ended up choosing the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law. It was the highest ranked school that offered me the most scholarship. And it was also conveniently located 20 minutes from where I grew up. So my support system was already kind of in place when I arrived. Having made that decision, I spent the last few months of JET just enjoying JET and trying to make that experience count, and came back to the US in 2008. And I started law school about 1 week later. And those first few weeks of law school were really intense. Not only because, when you come back from JET, you're dealing with sort of the reverse culture shock of coming back to your home country and sort of relearning things about where you came from that you may not have realized before you left for Japan. But in addition to that, there was also quite a bit of law school culture shock going on as well. I went into law school thinking it was going to be maybe a little tougher, but pretty analogous to what I experienced in undergrad, and it was not like that at all. The reading was significantly more onerous, sometimes just impossible to accomplish. You had professors who would either put you on call and ask you questions the entire class, sometimes with warning, sometimes without warning. or professors who would just randomly cold call anybody in the classroom. And if they really liked your last name for some reason, they would call on you quite a bit. And then there was the grading. Grading was very different than in undergrad, where, in undergrad, if you work hard enough, maybe impress your professor here and there, you can be pretty secure you're going to get a decent grade. In law school, your grade is pretty much fixed on your final examination, and that's about it. There may be some points here and there for participation, but not enough to really swing the needle too much. And there's only a finite number of good grades that they can give out because they're grading on a curve. And so you can work really hard, but if enough people work harder than you or write better essays in their final exam than you, you're not going to get the grades you think you're going to get. And that finite number of grades also results in some competitive and sometimes unethical behavior. I did have a course book stolen just before my finals, my second semester of law school. It was moderately traumatizing. I managed to pull out a decent grade out of that class, but still, if you're going to go to law school, I think definitely go in with your eyes open, knowing that it's a very different environment that can be, not just financially taxing because of the cost, but also mentally taxing just because of the environment that you're going to be in. Now, a few months into my first year of law school, we also had the financial crisis hit. Markets tanked. A lot of people, if they were graduating and had job offers, though some of those job offers were rescinded. By the time we were given access to Ohio State's legal employment portal, there really wasn't anything there except for maybe the top 10 to 5% of the class. And so, I ended up being pretty despondent at that point. And at that point of peak stress, I was actually really lucky enough in my random emails trying to get ideas of what to do. I shot out an email to Stephen Horowitz, who's presenting later, and he managed to call me back, and we had a really long conversation. And I don't remember the exact words or the details of it, but I do remember coming out of it feeling better and having a little more direction after we had talked. And a few months after that, I actually started a small blog called Jets with JDs, where I just kind of documented my law school experience. And it gave me just a way to process what I was going through and put it out to the broader Jet alum community. And it helped me realize that the Jet alumni community is actually extremely helpful and there for you if you want it. So that first summer, I still didn't really have a job. I worked for free helping an attorney write a treatise for tort law in Ohio. And then I studied abroad at Oxford through Ohio State's study abroad program for a couple months, got some extra course credit, bumped up my GPA a little bit. My second year of law school, in addition to having full coursework, I also picked up a research assistant position with a professor after the Oxford thing, and also picked up a law clerk position at a small commercial real estate firm based out of Columbus, Ohio, which is where OSU is. And that job mostly involved running documents to and from the courthouse for the attorneys, posting eviction notices. You got to remember it's the financial crisis. So they were doing more foreclosures and bankruptcies than they were doing actual deals. And then I also picked up a job teaching English to a professor just to help make money, meet my ends here. And I kept all those jobs in the law journal and coursework up throughout the rest of law school. And when I graduated, I got my first, sort of view of what my debt load was like, and it was pretty significant. Not the most significant I've ever seen, but pretty significant, $97,000. And the best offer I had on the table at that time was $13 an hour to remain a law clerk at that small commercial real estate firm. So that was pretty clearly not going to be tenable or sustainable long-term, or even something I really wanted to do in the short term. So I ended up moving to Texas, which is where my mom had moved in 2005. So it was always a plan B. And again, already had sort of a support system in place for me to pursue a career. I took the Texas bar exam in July. And on the Texas bar, they actually have oil and gas law as something you have to study for and take a test over. So I had some background, and around that time, the Marcellus Utica shale play actually kicked up in Ohio. So there were a bunch of Texas companies looking for people with an Ohio background and preferably a law degree to go up there and do title examination and prepare documents while they're negotiating with all these landowners to make sure the landowners they're negotiating with actually have uh, the mineral rights to sign the leases. Now, this was not a JD required position. This was JD preferred, but it was what gave me sort of the foothold to move on to my actual career. And 9 months of that work later, I managed to convince a Texas attorney to hire me down here in Houston at a large law firm. And I'm not going to go through all these little bullet points here on my career, but eventually the short version is large law firm work was pretty grueling and exhausting. I ended up switching to a smaller, more comfortable firm in 2014, and have been doing small firm oil and gas work since, with a small detour during the market crash in 2016. These last points will probably be reiterated by other presenters, but if you're thinking about going to law school, I think definitely know what you're getting yourself into in terms of cost, in terms of the competitive nature of the school, and if you can do research in the actual practice area you're trying to enter, either by talking to professionals or shadowing them, I think that would be incredibly useful before you set foot on the front door on your first day of school. So those are my thoughts, and I will turn it back over to Casey.
Thank you, Andy. Those are some really great tips on things to think about before applying for law school, and also things to think about if people want to take a similar career path as you. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Sarah, who will be talking about public interest law. Okay, Sarah, you should be able to unmute yourself. Sarah, can you hear me? Okay. Hold on one second. Sarah, are you able to share your screen now?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, great. Okay. Perfect. Just give me a moment here. Okay. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Okay. Great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Lee. I am a legal aid attorney in Boston. I'm admitted to practice in Massachusetts and New York and federal district court here in Massachusetts, but everything that I've done has always been in Massachusetts. I currently practice family law and housing. I've been practicing for about 9 years, and my entire career has been either public interest, nonprofit work, or representation of people from low income background. I unplugged it. So when I was in JET, I didn't know what I wanted to do after college, so I thought I would do 1 year of JET, and then 1 year in Japan turned into 3 years in Japan. I took, like Andy, I took the LSAT while I was on JET, studied in Japan. So that meant no bar prep classes were available to me. I couldn't do any tours of any law schools. I knew when I made the decision to go to law school that I wanted to have a career in public service somehow. I wanted to do nonprofit work or legal aid work. So like Andy, I attended the Moritz College of Law at Ohio State. And also like Andy, I was devastated. I was part of the class. I was devastated by the crash of 2008. So during law school, I clerked for the Legal Aid Society in their litigation department. And it was interesting because I went into it thinking I wasn't going to like litigation. And it turns out I enjoy litigation. So I learned something new in doing that clerkship. And I also did a clinic at the law school where we represented juveniles in juvenile court and also in immigration court. And my one regret about that was that I only did one semester and not a full year, because I feel like I would have been able to work the cases so much more because the cases lasted longer than a semester. The years after the crash were tough on everybody. It was bad for the law firms, but it was also bad for legal aid. A lot of nonprofits saw their funding drop after the crash when the interest rates also dropped. So I decided, because I was having trouble finding a legal aid job in Ohio, that I was going to pack up and go to Boston. And I spent several years volunteering and working in offices of the local legal aid organizations, volunteering so that I could put on my resume some real life work experience. And I was also working part-time. And I've been very fortunate because when I did get my first job offer in 2012 with the Public Defender's Agency of Massachusetts, CPCS, it turned out to be a very trial heavy and courtroom experience heavy job. And I did get a lot of trial experience, a lot of courtroom experience, which is very valuable for employers who are looking at potential hires. And it's also interesting because I never did moot court in law school. Again, I thought that was the kind of thing that I wouldn't like. And it turns out I enjoy it very much. And I've become pretty good at it. And ironically, many lawyers will never actually step inside a courtroom or a courthouse. I met with another, a friend of mine, somebody else who also went to OSU for law school. We graduated at the same time. And in the last 9 years, he told me he only stepped in a courtroom once, and that was when he had to do his own name change petition. And it was just kind of fascinating because he's a very talented attorney. He's a tax attorney, but he had never stepped inside a courtroom, whereas I am in the courtroom all the time. So I currently work for the Volunteer Lawyers Project of the Boston Bar Association. It is a legal aid office in Boston that focuses primarily on recruiting and training private bar attorneys, many of them who work at the large Boston firms like Ropes and Gray, Wilmer Hale, Goodwin, Mintz-Levin. We recruit them and train them, and then they come to our clinics where they may be able to spend a couple of hours once a week helping our clients, or they may be able to volunteer for our phone panel where they can give some brief legal advice over the phone to a client, or they can also take cases on full cases pro bono. But our model tends to focus more heavily on brief services, limited services, so that attorneys can come and volunteer with us without having to commit to long hours or taking a full case if they just don't have the capacity to do it. At the clinics, the volunteers can do things like give brief advice, help with paperwork, and in some cases they can even do same-day mediation or a court hearing for that client. Legal aid in Massachusetts is civil only, so we only do civil matters. We focus primarily on housing, family, consumer, bankruptcy, wage theft, wills, trusts and estates, and guardianship, which has become very big in the light of the opioid crisis. And we only serve low-income people who are financially eligible for our services. So I've been a staff attorney at VLP since January, and I love my job because, as corny as it sounds, I get to help people help other people. I help recruit and train the volunteers. I provide whatever support they may need. If there's a question, if they want somebody else to review the paperwork, if they need to run some strategy, by someone else, that's part of my job. I help run the clinics as the supervising attorney at our family clinic and our housing clinic. And I also assess cases that may be good cases to refer out to our pro bono panel for full representation. So because my experience has always been public interest law, that's what my advice is geared mostly towards. However, I do have a little bit of advice for anybody who might want to do anything on an international level. I'll explain that at the end. I do agree with a lot of what Andy said about costs and expectations. I think for legal services, a huge consideration is the location of where you want to be, because it may not be necessary to go to a T14 law school if you know you want to end up in a particular region of the country. Another serious consideration is that, obviously there's going to be the job market and the salary considerations, but also the work-life balance. It took me a very long time to learn that just because you're working at a nonprofit, it doesn't mean you have the work-life balance thing figured out. Many nonprofits, they might have a work culture that doesn't respect healthy work-life balance, or they might have a toxic work culture. So it really is going to depend on the organization where you want to apply and work for and what their culture is like. So I second the advice that anybody who is considering going to law school should first maybe do some work in a law office before law school, particularly in a legal aid office if that's what you're interested in. So I would also strongly recommend that people do their research about law schools, and especially the ones that are encouraging of people who want to do public interest work. Some law schools, they offer stipends. Some of them have very good clinics or externships where you can work in a legal aid office or intern in that office for credit. Some law schools are just better at others in encouraging public interest careers. Foreign language skills are a huge thing that legal services desperately need, because we do serve people who don't speak English as a first language. In the Boston region, that happens to be Spanish, Mandarin, Haitian Creole, Vietnamese. Unfortunately, Japanese is not one of those languages. For anybody who's considering doing public interest work, I would suggest researching fellowships that might be able to fund your work after graduation, and to think of projects and potential host organizations for the fellowships. And the last thing I'll say really quickly is that even if you are not interested in a public interest career, if you want to do anything at the international level, probably the majority of people who do some kind of international practice, they seek admission to either New York or California. And it is now required to have 50 hours of pro bono work in order to get admitted to the New York bar. My understanding is that California is also considering implementing a rule like this. So even if you're not interested in public interest, you should be looking out for pro bono opportunities if you're planning on getting admitted to either of those states. And the last thing I would say is that one area of law that could be good for both business and public interest is immigration. And I know certainly on the business end, there is a lot of work, especially with Japanese businesses, not so much on the pro bono end, but it is an area where you could do both and also remain connected to working with Japan, United States relations. And so that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. That was very insightful guidance to keep in mind when thinking about going into public interest work. Now we are going to go ahead and hand it over to Jonathan, who will be talking about Japanese document review.
Thank you, Casey. Okay, Casey, can you see my screen? Can you hear me?
Yes, you sound good, and I can see your screen.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Casey, and thank you to Andy for reaching out to me for this presentation, and thank you to everyone for listening. Hello, my name is Jonathan Carl. I was a CIR for the city of Niigata from 2008 to 2011, and today I'll talk to you first about my JET experience, then about the transition from JET into law school, and then my career after that. I will specifically talk about what I've been doing, which is Japanese doc review, and then conclude with a few reflections on the whole process. Here, just a few pictures of me on the JET program interpreting. There's my Ultimate Frisbee, Niigata Ultimate Frisbee School on the top right. As you see from this pie chart, most of my time was spent during the JET program on translation with a little bit of interpreting. The only reason I mention that is because that became important for Japanese document review later, having that translation experience particularly. Like Andy and Sarah, I also took the LSAT while I was in Japan on the JET program. I think I started getting serious about my law school application towards the end of my second year. I was in JET for 3 years. Towards the end of my second year, beginning of my third year. And I took the LSAT, I took it twice at Temple University in Tokyo. And I think Andy and Sarah went over some of the upsides and downsides of taking the LSAT while you're in Japan. Another one of the downsides, I don't know if it's still this way, I don't know if it was mentioned, but I think ordinarily when you take the LSAT, you'll get a section by section breakdown of your score. And for some reason, when you take it in Japan, you only get your total score and they don't show you what you scored on each section. So it's harder to know which areas you need to improve on the test. It might have changed since 2010, 2011 when I took the test. But yeah, I did that. Got my application in order, got all my recommendations, wrote my personal statement, and got accepted to a few schools, and returned to the US in the summer of 2011. Like Andy said, you sort of need to be ready to hit the ground running when you come back if you're from Japan, if you're enrolling in a US law school immediately upon your return from Japan. I think JET lets you, your JET contract ends mid to late July, and my law school started the first week of August. The law school that I was thinking about going to, which was University of Georgia. And so I kind of wasn't ready and wasn't actually sure if I even wanted to go to law school and be a lawyer. So I decided to defer my enrollment for a year. I did that with all the schools where I was accepted, and apparently that's a thing you can do. I think there's like a $100 fee to do that. And so I deferred my enrollment for a year, and I started working at a law firm in Atlanta as a lingual analyst for about a year, or for about 9 months. Basically, I was a translator at that law firm, translating Japanese emails into English, Japanese emails, spreadsheets, various business documents, and then handing those over to the case team that was using them to build their case. And while I was working there, I met a guy who was also a JET alum, and he was sort of managing the translators. And brilliant conversationalist that I am, when I shook his hand, I said, "How much money do you make?" And he said, $200,000 a year. So in the fall of 2012, I enrolled in the University of Georgia School of Law. thoughts on this process? Well, I'll get to that at the end of my presentation, my general reflections on everything. So I'll just move on to the next slide, talking about law school. So I attended the University of Georgia School of Law from 2012 to 2015. UGA, I think, is a decently ranked state school. It's not like, it's nowhere near like University of Texas, but I think it's probably in the top 50 law schools. The advantage of going to a big state school is that you've got all the resources of a state school, which are pretty tremendous. And it's usually going to cost less than a private school or maybe an Ivy League school or something like that. It'll probably cost a lot less. And after your first year, you can usually get an in-state tuition waiver, so they'll treat you like a resident of that state. And then I was fortunate; I got that waiver for my first year too, in addition to some more scholarship money. So I felt like University of Georgia was a good choice for me. Like Andy said, I also had a little bit of a culture shock coming back to the US, and then just with law school in general. I remember after my first semester, my 1L year, I had taken my Civ Pro exam. And the question was something like, does the court have jurisdiction over this case? And my answer was no, because you had us read this one case and it was similar and they didn't have jurisdiction, so that's that. And I got a C-, and the professor emailed us all the kid with the highest grade and the answer that he had written, and it was several pages, and it said, well, it could be it could have jurisdiction because of this case, but actually maybe there's this case. And he had gone over several cases that I thought the professor had told us weren't even relevant, but apparently, anyways, I realized that I was in no way prepared or for law school at that point. So anyway, my 1L summer, I worked at a Nissan plant in Franklin, Tennessee. Nissan makes a car called the Nissan Leaf, which is an electric vehicle. And Panasonic is a subcontractor for them that makes the power distribution unit, which is a computer that controls how power is distributed to the rest of the car. And during that summer, they were instituting a recall on that PDU, and they needed some laborers to take PDUs and move them around and reprogram them. And the laborers needed to speak Japanese, so I got the gig. And if you're wondering what that has to do with law school and the law, basically nothing at all. I knew at that point I was pretty much out of the running for any kind of coveted big law clerkship or anything of that sort. So at that point, I knew that I could do Japanese document review. So I didn't really go for a clerkship for my law school summer jobs. My 2L summer, I worked as a translator, as a freelance translator. I'd actually been working as a freelance translator since my 3rd year of JET, and I continued to do that throughout law school and during the law school summers. So as I mentioned earlier, my grades were somewhere between abysmal and mediocre. I think I had a 2.2 GPA. And I sort of realized as I went through law school that it's very competitive, and you've got to have a plan, and you need to, especially that first semester, your 1L year, you can't let it sort of happen to you and figure it out as you go along. You need to hit the ground running. Maybe have your supplements, have read them before you take your first class, and always be sort of focused on the exam for each class you have, and trying to grab as many points basically as you can on the exam. Since law school, so the good news is that you can't really fail out of law school, I think. I had several classes where I thought there's no way I would do the exam, and I thought there's no way I passed, and somehow I got C-. So I got a lot of C-, but I graduated, and May of 2015. And so I decided I would apply for a job and try to become a lawyer. And I did that by posting my resume on monster.com. And trying to get a job by posting your resume on monster.com is sort of like being a guy and going to the bar and hoping women will come and hit on you, which is to say, it only really works if you're very handsome. And fortunately, I think knowing Japanese and speaking it well is sort of like, in a certain way, being handsome. And that is to say, within an hour of posting my resume on Monster, I'd gotten 2 phone calls and voicemails from recruiters offering to pay for my trip to New York to be interviewed to be a Japanese doc reviewer. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but that was very nice to hear after graduating in the bottom like 10% of my class, I think. So anyway, these recruiters had me take this test, which they use to screen applicants for Japanese doc review jobs, and it's called the CELTA test. It's a test administered by a private company to basically evaluate your Japanese language ability to see if you're capable of doing Japanese doc review. The test is about an hour long, and it's a written multiple choice test. It consists of about 10 reading prompts where you'll get an article of a few paragraphs, and then it'll ask you a few questions about each article. And some people say it's easier for native speakers than Japanese speakers because of, I think the articles themselves are actually English articles that were translated into Japanese. But anyway, I think I did really well on the ALTA tests. Went to New York, got a job offer from a company or from a firm in New York, and then another firm that had offices in New York and LA. Ended up going with the second firm, and they said I could work in San Francisco, LA, or New York, and I looked on the website and saw they had an office in Houston, and I said, can I work in Houston? And they said, okay. So from July 2015 to around July 2017, I worked at Winston & Strawn at their office in Houston, Texas. And at that time, I think there was a tremendous demand for Japanese reviewers. I think the demand has dried up maybe a little bit since then, but yeah, at that time, you didn't have to be a licensed attorney to be a Japanese document reviewer. So I didn't even take the bar exam until 2018. Yeah, I graduated from law school with about just under $50,000 in debt, and I paid that off, before Thanksgiving. So it, financially, it worked out well for me. Japanese document review was good to me. So I took and passed the Texas bar exam in February 2018. I recommend Barbary. That was a very helpful prep course. I'm going to go back to that slide. And then I worked as a Japanese review attorney for a consulting company, FTI Acuity, that provides basically discovery support services to law firms in litigation and regulatory compliance. And now I work for Letter Solutions, which is a similar smaller company. I worked for FTI in New York on a regulatory matter last summer. I worked on a Japanese contract dispute case in Dallas later that year, and then I've worked again for FTI this year, for most of this year, and now I'm back in Houston working for Letter Solutions on a big patent infringement case. And I've also continue to work as a freelance translator. So what is Japanese document review? To answer that question, you have to ask, what is doc review? Doc review is an aspect of discovery that is the exchange of documents and information that could be evidence in a given legal matter or case, litigation. Basically, voluminous quantities of documents are exchanged, especially in mass tort cases. We're talking truckloads, of physical files and terabytes upon terabytes of data. All the executives of a company, their hard drives are scanned. All of those documents on that hard drive, all the emails, everything has to be reviewed. It has to be reviewed to determine whether or not those documents are relevant in any way to the litigation. And if they are, if those documents are protected by the attorney-client privilege, if there's any confidential client information in there or third-party information in there that needs to be protected. That's what doc review is. It's basically sitting in front of a computer in a cubicle farm or in-house at a law firm. And so I'll just go over the pros and cons real quick of doc review. The pros is that Japanese document review, and I think to some extent Korean document review, Mandarin Chinese document review, relatively well-paying compared to English document review. It's an easy job. It's not a work job that's going to follow you home at the end of the day. You're not, once you clock out, you're not going to be thinking about this job at all, basically, until you clock in the next morning. I briefly worked at my dad's law firm for about 3 weeks after I passed the bar, and actually had to do real lawyer work, and it was very stressful and hard. And I think it could have been rewarding, if I'd gotten good at it and stuck with it. But I think document review is easy to balance with something like a family or even another career. Actually, a lot of people do it. And another benefit of document review, it's a broad and shallow introduction to multiple areas of law. You work on a lot of different types of cases, and that can be interesting. You can learn about a lot of different companies. It's voyeuristic. You're reading a lot of famous people's emails sometimes. You have interesting coworkers. You're working with people that speak Japanese. That's kind of nice to people. A lot of former Jets. You get to spend time with people that have a kind of a similar background, which is nice. And also, which I think is a benefit, is you get paid to practice Japanese. Studying Japanese is a hobby of mine, and it's nice that I'm basically getting paid to learn new Japanese words every day. The downsides of Japanese doc review, this could be viewed as a downside, is that it's document review. It's not a glamorous profession, and on the totem pole, on the hierarchy of legal jobs, I think it's sort of looked down upon as not really being the practice of law, and that's basically accurate. It's not. It's basically not. You're not making a lot of lawyer decisions in the day-to-day. Another con, especially Japanese document review, it's not exactly stable employment. If you can find permanent document review positions or in-house positions, but you're sort of at the mercy of the market and what litigations are occurring at any given time. Another is that it might not be particularly meaningful to you. Some people want to have meaning through their work and want it to give their life meaning. And document review is probably not going to do that for you. Another issue is that there's uncertain prospects for growth. Who knows? Google might invent an algorithm that can do this job for us, or Japanese businesses might become more litigation averse and just stop litigating things, and there won't be a demand for Japanese reviewers in the future. And I've also been told that doc review is sort of the kiss of death on your resume, and that is that it, with law jobs, people say the biggest difficulty is getting your first substantive legal job, and then after that, they're not asking you, where you clerked or what your GPA is. They're asking you, what you did before. And when you do doc review, you don't really have that yet. You don't really have your foot in the door anywhere, and the clock is ticking, and so that can be a con. And just reflections on the process. As far as taking the LSAT, I would suggest take a lot of practice tests, and then you can take, studies have shown that every time you take the LSAT, your score tends to go up a little bit. And I think some schools will look at how many times you've taken it, so it can look bad if you've taken it several times. So take a lot of practice tests for the LSAT. As far as which school to go to, you can go to the best possible, the highest ranked school that you can get accepted to. You can go to the cheapest school you get accepted to, or you can go to a school in a region where you think you might practice. I suggest a combination of those three approaches. And as reflections on law school, like I said earlier, be aggressive, be there, arrive with a plan, and get ready to go to work from day one or before day one, and focus on those exams, focus on the clerkship you want to land, or sort of the path you want to chart to get you to where you want to be when you graduate. And as far as your career, most importantly, you need to join the JET Alumni Association. I strongly recommend that. And I also, I think I hope I didn't sound frivolous as I went through my presentation here. I do think you should take pride in your work. And I think, even though it is DocReview, I always made sure to cross my T's, dot my I's, give my employers 100% on everything I worked on. And I think that's opened doors for me as I've as I've worked as a reviewer. And anyways, thank you for listening. All right, I will hand the mic back over to Casey. Casey?
Hello? Hello? Oh, I'm the host now? Okay, can everybody hear me? Let's see. Oops. Hold on. Let me see. Can't do both things at the same time. Oh, okay, you can hear me, good. Okay, thank you to Casey, and thank you to Bahia, and also to Paige Cunningham-Streeter, who I noticed is on this, is listening. Thanks, guys, for setting this up. The whole webinar series of the other topics, not just today, but all the other ones, has been really fantastic. And it's a really terrific resource, so thanks. And it's been really terrific listening to everybody's presentation and hearing all these different perspectives of career paths. I appreciated Jonathan's, because I did a stint as a Japanese doc reviewer, wow, almost 20 years ago. And it was bringing back all these memories. Anyway, I've also had a winding legal career, and ended up as director of legal English programs at St. John's.
We can't see your PowerPoint, so
Oh,
you have to go ahead and
what do I have to do?
Yeah.
Oh, I have to do share. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Share screen. Yes. Click on this. Share. Okay. Good. And then close this. Okay.
Yes, we can see it now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I work at St. John's as the director of legal English programs, and that's really a dream job, getting to combine what I did on JET, the ESL, with my law career. And I also get to work with two other JET alumni, if anybody knows Katie Piper and Zach Piper. Let's see. I started off after JET. I had taken the LSAT before I left for JET, and then I ended up deferring a couple of years. And it was kind of funny because I got into one school, and I got into a couple of schools, and I deferred one, but the other one I didn't even ask them to defer, and they deferred also. So I guess once you're in, they kind of want you. I didn't know why I was going to law school, but and a friend of mine who had started law school said, don't go unless you really know you want to go. And it turned out he was right. I probably should not have gone to law school, but it's worked out. I've made it work, but not without a fair amount of struggle and self-examination. After law school, I was able to land a job at a big firm in New York. Then I left. I just quit cold turkey because I just felt like a fish out of water. But then I ended up with a job at a company that just happened to work on bankruptcy cases, working with creditors and shareholders and bondholders, sort of administrative stuff. But I did that for 8 years, and then finally I decided to go back to ESL. So I I got some ESL certification and did a master's. And then I was fortunate, sort of at the right place at the right time, landed a job at St. John's Law School, which is where I've been since about 2014. Let's see. As I said, I applied to law school. I got in. I just applied to see where I could get in. I had good LSATs. Got into Duke, so I went. But it was major culture shock, not just going back to the U.S. and not just going to law school, but also going to North Carolina. I'm from New Jersey originally, so experiencing some Southern culture. Yeah, I was really lost the first semester of law school. That was kind of rough. But then I got a summer internship at a law firm in Nagoya. I just wrote some letters to. It was all sort of pre-internet or just the beginning of the internet. And I was able to somehow track down some names of some lawyers in Nagoya, and one of them was happy to have me. So I went there, really didn't know much of what I was getting into, ended up just reviewing contracts and making little edits and things, nothing major in this small little firm. And then I ended up taking off a year of law school and continuing to work with that lawyer, because I just didn't want to go back. And also I figured I could earn some more money. I made a lot of money from JET because I didn't have any expenses, and my town gave me bonuses and covered all my expenses, which was very rare. But so I was able to pay my first year of law school without any loans, which was great and helpful in the long run. Then in my third year of law school, I went back to Japan and was able to set up a semester of study at Waseda University. The law school Duke was thrilled to have a relationship with Waseda and vice versa, so they let me go there. And then there was a Duke law alum who had a practice in Japan, a former Japanese LLM student. And so I was able to work there a few days a week and get get some interesting experience, earn a little bit of money on the side. One of the things I remember about law school is that I instantly gravitated to the LLM students. I did not know that was a thing. And I just loved that there was all these students from other countries, including Japan, that I could relate to. And I just found I did not relate as much to the American law students. The other thing I realized in retrospect, dealing with all the debt of law school, I did still have significant debt. I think it was in like the 50 to 60,000 range when I graduated. And I just paid it off a few years ago. But I used to always tell people afterwards, don't go to law school. It's not worth it unless you really know you want to go and be a lawyer. But now I've sort of changed my tune, because I think law school, it's a buyer's market, and the law schools are competing for students, and in part because the job market is not what it used to be. But if you do want to go to law school, you can get scholarships that pay for a lot, or if not all, of your costs of going to law school, at least for the tuition. And if they like you and they want you there, not only could you go tuition free, but they'll really make sure that they'll use their whole network to make sure you get a good job, because that's having alumni who are well placed is good for the future of the law school. So it's actually a pretty good deal to go to law school these days. Let's see. So I worked for about 9 years for a shareholder bondholder firm on the side while I was doing that. And that was much less intense than law firm work. I got involved with JETAA New York at that time as the newsletter editor, and also started the Bankruptcy Bill cartoon series with an illustrator friend. And I started writing bankruptcy blog posts, sort of ghostwriting blog posts for a couple of consumer bankruptcy law firms to make some money on the side. And that was really a period where I had stability in my job, but didn't have to worked a 9-to-5 job. And I was able to start, especially getting involved with JET alumni, was able to take risks and try things out, which I think getting involved with any JET alumni association is really good for. And I think doing those activities, things that I wouldn't have done at my own job, I was able to try out, and there was nobody to question it. I think that helped me build confidence a lot. And then that started transferring into my work. And then I think I started doing better in my career. I was trying to get away from law, so I took a grant writing job at a nonprofit. And that was like 32nd Street. And I would take walks at lunchtime to kind of think about stuff. And I ran into a JET alum I know, Maria Pariser. And I said, what are you doing these days? And she had started teaching ESL, and she was doing it freelance. And at the time, I was organizing a a discussion panel on freelancing. I pulled together a few different JET alumni freelancers, mostly translators and writers. So Maria was a little different, so I got her on the panel. And then when I actually moderated that panel, I was listening to her and thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to be teaching and meeting people from different countries and cultures. So I decided to go back to ESL. So I first got a CELTA. It was like a 1-month course that cost, I don't know, $1,000 or $2,000. But it opened up some doors to teach at some language schools, which didn't pay well. But then working at those language schools, I learned about a job opportunity to teach a summer course at Pace Law School. And I was teaching Saudi students legal English. And that was the first time I'd done that. And then I hit a wall because I realized if I wanted to earn more money, I had to teach at an academic level. And to do that, I really needed a master's in TESOL. And I decided to do it at Hunter College because it was the cheapest program, but it turned out to be a really fantastic program. There's one of the main faculty, Ann Ediger, teaches an advanced grammar course that was fantastic and really changed my whole perspective on teaching and on grammar and my understanding of sort of what it is and what it can be. On the side, I also taught for a year in an adult basic ed program in the CUNY system, which I was able to get using LinkedIn and JET connections to get to somebody who I was able to send a resume to, which was really helpful. And that helped me learn to teach about writing. And then I called around to different law schools to see what their needs were. Fortunately, there's a JET alum, Clara Solomon, who is the Career Services Director at NYU Law School. And before that, she was the Career Services Director for the LLM program at NYU, which has a huge LLM program. And so she set me up to talk with a couple people in her office to learn more about sort of what was going on and get the lay of the land. And as I was calling around to different schools, it was St. John's where I think they had started an LLM program not too long before, and they really needed somebody kind of with my skill set. So it was kind of the right place at the right time. I thought I was going in to just talk with them, and it turned out they basically hired me unbeknownst to me, more or less. So at a year after that, so I taught as an adjunct, which was good. And then a year after that, I became a full-time employer, at a full-time position, which was fantastic because I was doing a lot of teaching and getting paid a full-time salary with benefits. And the advice I was given when I decided to do a master's in TESOL was that it's very difficult to make a living in New York. You have to string together adjunct jobs. And if you leave New York, you can get something full-time. And I was able to get something full-time in New York, where I was doing a lot of teaching, but was technically an administrative role. So that's my path. I mean, it's essentially try and fail and take risks and talk to people and sort of carve your own path. If you're interested in learning more about what I do, I started something at St. John's called the St. John's Legal English blog. I still do JETWit and circulate jobs for job listings for the JET alumni community. I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. And I strongly encourage people, if you're lawyers or you're interested in law, to get on the JETAA law group on LinkedIn. It's a great way. It's not active like a Facebook group because it's LinkedIn, but it's a great way to see who else is out there in the sort of like a place where you can find other JET alumni who are in the law and connect with them if that's helpful. I think that's all I have to say on the topic now, so I'll turn it back over to Casey, and I guess it's time for questions as well.
Thank you, Stephen. That was really great advice, and it was good to see your career path and how it took several different turns before you got where you were. Now we're going to go ahead and take questions. You can go ahead and type your questions into the chat box or into the Q&A feature. You can also do the raise hand feature where you can ask your question with a microphone, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute all of the panelists so that they can answer your questions as they come up. So it looks like we already had a couple of questions that were answered. There was one question that was still remaining in the Q&A. What are the benefits of a deferred enrollment? And anyone can go ahead and answer that question.
I think I was the one that, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say I did it because I wanted to stay on JET another year.
Yeah.
In my case, it gave me a year to think about whether I wanted to go to law school. And I didn't have to reapply, so that was the benefit for me.
Okay, it looks like someone has their hand raised, so we're going to go ahead and allow, oh, it looks like it's Paige, so we're going to go ahead and allow her to talk and ask the question. You should be able to talk now.
Hi, I didn't realize my hand was raised, but since I have the mic, I'll just say thank you all. This is really fascinating. I did the JET program after having practiced law for 1 year, and that experience combined with the JET experience really prepared me for the leadership roles that I've had. So I'm really glad that you're doing this panel and offering so many diverse perspectives, because these options were not something that I was aware of at the time. Thank you all.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Were there any other questions? You can go ahead and have in the Q&A. Did everyone who asked under the Q&A, did everyone have their questions answered, or did you want to follow up those questions or anything? Let's see. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. I did see the questions in the Q&A, which you guys have already started to answer. So that looks great. I want to thank everyone for coming to the webinar. And I also want to remind you guys that we'll be posting the webinar. So if you know anyone else that would be interested in watching, we should have that up in the next week or so. I'd also like to thank our speakers again, Stephen and Jonathan, Sarah and Andy. Thank you for joining us and giving us good advice on next steps. Our next webinar will be in early September, and it will be on the microgrant for current JET. So if you know anyone that's a current JET, if you're a current JET, please check that out. That will be on our Facebook and on our website, and that's our information there. If you want to contact us, send us an email, or connect with us on Facebook, please do so. And we will also be sharing any links or anything that the speakers have had in their PowerPoints or shared out with you. We'll send those out with the webinar as well, in case you wanted to check up on any of those. Well, I want to say thank you again to everyone, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.